So every people pleaser has a complicated relationship with anger because it's an ugly emotion and it's not one that we ever want to admit to having. I think over the years I've had to get in touch with anger and being okay with anger. But then also it's something that maybe more recently I've been able to let go of, because sure, I could be angry at my family or my schooling or my church, but that the anger doesn't change anything. They don't know that I'm angry necessarily. That's not going to change them in any way. I'm not going to be revising the Catholic Church anytime soon, right? Because I'm angry at them. So that anger just is a detriment to me if I hold on to it. I'm the only one who's getting hurt.
Welcome back to AudioLife Memoirs, where we tell your story in your voice. I'm your host today, Carrie Purcell, and today you're going to hear part 2 of my conversation with Alena Papayanis. If you haven't heard part 1, this might be a good time to hit pause and go back 1 episode so that you can hear the beginning of our conversation. If you have heard part 1, welcome back. I hope you enjoy. I just want to pause for a minute because I realize we're talking about, experiences that are difficult, that have been probably painful, that you've lived. We've brought up media several times. We're here putting a story out in front of people. You have explored several kinds of media, and you've used them in different ways in order to share stories, to share that kind of that route, that path, that it can look different ways, that, that there is modeling and role modeling that people can look to. I think that's really important. And so I do want to acknowledge these are difficult conversations, and thank you. I'm going to probably ask a few more difficult questions, but we're also, going to broadly explore. But I also want to pause on media, right? And how important it is to have the conversation we're having today, but the role of media in your life today. I want to say this carefully because in social media, we can often say you have a persona, and you do have a persona. It doesn't mean that it's an inauthentic version of you, that it's a different, but it's a part of you that you're showing in a different way. So I want to be very careful that I don't think that you're using media to be different versions of yourself. I think you're exploring different sides. You talk about how, social media lets you use humor. And I think one of your essays is called, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's called, If We Do Not Laugh, We Will Cry. And you talk about why humor is essential for understanding ourselves and the world. And I think your writing is more serious, right? It's a little bit more academic, and you're tackling a lot of difficult subjects, emotions, and things that you're working through within yourself and or seeing in your community. So that's a lot for me. I want to hear from you how the different uses of social media came about, what it means to you to be able to put that voice out there and those voices out there.
Right. So it was really during the pandemic, the early days, actually just pre-lockdown, that I had gone through a breakup, and I just started to kind of write an essay about it, or just write about it to kind of unpack what had happened. Mm-hmm. And it was actually through writing that I discovered I was a people pleaser. Like in the middle of writing that. Wow. Just kind of the term people pleaser popped into my head, and I didn't know what it was or where it had come from. And I remember Googling, like, what is a people pleaser? And these characteristics came up, and I was just like, jaw to the ground. Yeah. And immediately kind of sad for myself, truly, because I realized that I was kind of performing this role rather than being myself. And so writing right from the start was a way to understand myself and understand my experiences. And then shortly after, we went into lockdown, and I discovered TikTok, and then started making some funny videos that were also about being a people pleaser or coming out later in life. And yeah, my writing is more serious, but I'm starting to play more with humor in them. Mm-hmm. But really, if you had just read my writing, you might be surprised of my TikTok persona or presence, and then vice versa. Yeah. Because I think I write on my TikTok bio that I'm like silly on here, but a serious writer. because it feels like two sides of the same coin for me, and a fun way to bring some levity to things. Because, as you mentioned earlier, there is some grief around coming out later in life. And it's such a relative term, though, because I've heard 25-year-olds say that they came out later in life.
Right.
And, so it really is relative for everyone. But what is involved in it is this feeling of missing out or feeling of grief. But we can poke fun in some ways to be like, how did I not know? And playing, poking fun at, whatever we did in our early life, to be like, how did I not know? Or the reasons I didn't know. It's like, they're all ways to understand ourselves and to understand our experiences.
Yeah.
And then, things like the podcast, Dear Queer Podcast, that's really an opportunity to just reach people who are at any stage of their coming out journey. Maybe they're fully out, maybe they're not, and they're just trying to explore, their own identity or explore the queer experience. And they just want to hear, friends having conversations about their experience. And it's not to say that every topic we cover is queer specific, but it's like just conversations we like to have with each other, and topics we like to explore. And then the writing, though, really early on stood out to me as a way to allow people to feel kind of empowered in their own journey. So the first article I published was for Chatelaine, and it was about coming out later in life as queer in my late 30s. Mm-hmm. And I remember having a vulnerability hangover when that went out, because it was my first one, and it was such a huge, story and so personal to put out there. But then I was just inundated with women who found it from all sorts of places around the world, and were grateful to see it there, because it was either their own journey as well that they've been through, or what felt even more powerful was women who were in the midst of it or about to come out.
Yeah.
And for them, it seemed like it really represented, it was this story that their story could be too.
Yes.
And so it was comforting for them to see, okay, I can get through this too. There's light at the end of the tunnel. I know it's going to be hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
I can muster that bravery and that courage as well. And so that just felt overwhelming in the most wonderful way, to have women finding it and saying, thank you, I needed this.
Yes. Yeah, that's very powerful. So let's share more about that journey. So, in your kind of the biographical approach we're taking, we've gotten to, you did decide to get married. We didn't talk about this yet, but you did have a child. And then at some point after that, what happened? Yeah. Tell us about that journey. When did it click? When did you allow yourself to start exploring that there could be another, more authentic, more comfortable, more fulfilling version of life for you?
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they have a kid, those like when you're spending, 2 a.m. and it's dark and you're just alone in a room feeding a baby, it can feel kind of like a deep reflective time too. And maybe, some people after having kids change their job, or they quit their job, or they decide to do something else, because it does provide this long periods of time where you kind of can't ignore yourself.
Yeah.
So there's partly that, but then just physically for me, that's when I think being pregnant and having a child just brought me into my body in a way that I hadn't been in my body before. So it was really after having her that I could feel my body in a new way, and I could feel discomfort or resistance around intimacy with a man. And so that was really, it was like I could suddenly feel this wall that was there that previously just felt normal to me.
Yeah.
And so suddenly I could see it.
Yeah.
And that's when I really realized I needed to explore what this meant and what it was. And so early on, I considered myself to be questioning And that's very valid for people to be in a questioning period, be like, I'm not sure anymore exactly what my sexuality is, and to take time to explore that.
Yep.
And so it was really quite an extended period of questioning and looking back, which makes sense to being kind of on autopilot too. I was very much a thinker, like an overthinker, logic-based. And I think it was that I was forced to also get into a more feeling sense of myself, to be like, okay, but I know what I think I should do.
Yes.
But like, what do I want to do? Who am I actually? And so that battle between, thinking and feeling,
yeah.
I had to really kind of get in touch with, like my inner self and what was she trying to tell me?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when they're questioning before coming out, it really just takes that listening. And there were some women who reached out to me, and we had like little one-on-ones where they'd ask me questions like, well, how do you get over this? Or how did you come to terms with this? And what a lot of it came down to was just like truly, truly listening to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like closing your eyes, sitting with yourself and listening to what is being said inside you and what you truly, truly need to explore about yourself, and trying to let that thinking side and those fears and guilt and whatever else has been preventing you from doing that to take a back seat to whatever is like that message inside actually is.
Yeah. It couldn't have been a quick journey. It couldn't have been an easy journey to start to listen, to decide to say it out loud to the people that it was going to have a big impact, to decide that you needed to act on it. Take us through a bit of that, if I can ask.
Yeah. So, the first person I told I was questioning was actually a therapist, a queer therapist, because I felt like that was a safe space to voice it for the first time. And that's another thing that people questioning or coming out might find is like saying it for that first time is just terrifying, because once you say it, it becomes your new reality. It becomes a truth that is harder to ignore because you brought it out into the world instead of just holding it up, inside yourself. So it was a process for me, telling the therapist and kind of exploring this questioning with him first. And before I could voice it to, it was very soon after I don't know exactly the timeline, but therapist was first before I could voice it to my ex-husband. But it was literally probably within days. Like I just needed that first person to be a therapist, to be a queer person, to feel safe in order to even say it out loud. But it wasn't like I was saying I know I'm queer. It was like I'm questioning.
Yeah.
Like I'm questioning my sexuality at this time. And in terms of telling family, it wasn't until me and my ex-husband were already kind of through the worst parts of it and the darkest days of conversations and things like that I was able to tell family, because just with my history of having these other voices being so strong in my head in terms of who I should be and how I should be and how I should live my life, I felt like I needed to be very solid in my identity in order to tell any family, because I was worried that if I had told anyone there sooner, that there would have been attempts to push back, to reel me in from going down that path. So I'm proud of myself looking back for being aware enough to know that I needed that space to be able to figure it out on my own and feel like I was in a good place and kind of far enough on the other end that it was safe enough for me to do that without like recoiling entirely into, an earlier version of myself. So it was a process. And then in terms of telling friends, it was like a few close friends at first. And, you learn how to sort of gauge who feels safe and who doesn't. And sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you tell someone that you think is going to be better at it than they are, and then they're not, and you're like, ooh, I got that one wrong. But it makes sense if it's a slow process, because you're really kind of finding your footing. And part of that is finding those, it's like walking across a little river on stones, and you're going to kind of test the stones first before you fully step on them, right? And that's what you're doing with the people in your life. You're kind of slowly finding your footing and testing what's safe and whatnot before you can move forward. And that felt like a similar process.
Yeah. And it sounds thoughtful, intentional, careful, building lots of trust building. And then I like the sort of intentional tactic with family, where it's like, you said it very eloquently. I'll say it kind of crudely, like, it's too late, it's already done. Like, can't change it now, right? Like, it's like, I'm not going to put myself in that position.
In order to protect yourself, really.
Yes. Yeah. So how did it, if it did, impact your relationship with family, with your mother, father, sisters, any other close family that you were probably worried about in your earlier years and considerations?
Sometimes with family, sometimes it doesn't change a thing.
Yeah.
And that's lovely. Like, for example, for one of my aunts, I didn't tell her verbally, but I remember dropping her off once after dinner with family, and I gave her a letter, and I said, I need you to read this. And then the next time I saw her, she didn't say anything about it, but she was like over the top loving, And so that to me felt like acceptance. It felt like acknowledgement that she read it. But she was like making an extra effort to not only say, this doesn't change anything, but it's like, I love you. I still love you. I love you even more. I'll always love you, So that was really nice. But you can sometimes get, awkward questions from family when they just don't understand, and especially because, you've been processing it for a long time. And especially, I told a lot of them once I was already in a good, safe landing place. But for them, it's new information. So they're processing it. Be like, well, what do you mean? Well, you dated men before. So, are you sure? Or like questions like, are you sure this isn't just a phase? Or, you get kind of questions that are uncomfortable often to deal with, or just feel a bit kind of like they're missing the point. But you just have to acknowledge that it takes time for people to process it, and it's new information to them. So it's gonna you're gonna have some awkward questions. Hopefully you don't have, and I didn't have any like super negative, there was no disowning, there was none of that happening. But, there was definitely awkwardness, and, as people kind of came to terms with this new normal.
Yes. Yeah. That was really well said. And I think, at least on your journey, you'd spent a lot of time considering, very carefully acting, very carefully sharing your, what you had to share with people in different ways. But for them, so first reactions could be offensive, they could be hurtful, they could just sound frustrating and stupid, right? And it's like, what a stupid question. No, of course it's not a phase or whatever. And I'm not saying that's how you felt, but I feel like you've kind of, you are putting a bit of a roadmap that people can follow and expect. And the advice and the awareness that they're just processing for the first time. It's first reactions. Not everybody is prepared and has given thought, or they have a gut reaction that, isn't necessarily going to be their reaction over time.
Exactly.
But and we won't go into this further, but sometimes there are some hurtful moments there that can stay with you, even though you've very carefully realized the journey that they're going through, that this is new, they're processing, this is not set in stone for them. They will start to understand, they will accept. It doesn't mean that what came out early on doesn't hurt.
And now for a word from our sponsors. Ready to share your stories and life philosophy, or capture those of a parent or grandparent? Or maybe a corporate package is right for you to build connection across your workforce and add value to your clients. Visit audiolife.io today to learn more. Our listeners will get 10% off using discount code GIFT 10, and order number AudioLife podcast. AudioLife, where memories find their voice.
So I want to ask this question. I want you to take the context as broadly as you want to, because it can be a huge question. So looking back, is there anything you would have done differently?
Oh, wow, that's huge.
I know.
I mean, my daughter's watching Back to the Future right now. Maybe if I could do that and like go back in time to, my early days and just put like a queer book on my bookshelf, or something. Maybe I would have done that. But I mean, it's one of those things where as much as you wish that, you just couldn't. Like, you can't be ready before you're ready. As much as we can look from our perspective now and say, I wish I could have done that differently, we just aren't ready until we're ready. So, all the things need to be in place. You have to have enough sort of sense of self, enough courage, enough perspective, and, or enough experience, whatever it is that culminates in you finally being able to kind of break free from whatever it is you've been tied to or stuck to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that doesn't mean that I don't have grief over it, and looking back say, oh, I wish this or I wish that, but we have to always remember that we're coming from our point of view now, having known things.
Yeah.
And those previous versions of ourselves just didn't know.
Yeah.
They didn't know any better. They were doing their best. They were working with the information they had at the time.
Yeah.
And we can't change that now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in one way or another, that sentiment comes up in almost every one of these podcast conversations I have, that, you could say it 100 ways, but most people wouldn't have changed their journey because of where they are now and what they understand now. And, maybe it comes down to not that regret isn't helpful, or maybe it comes down to it just was your journey, right? Just that acceptance that was your journey and that was the timing, and that is.
I mean, also, this is a much better story, isn't it?
It is. It's a good story.
Right? This is a better story, and this is the story that another woman will read who's in a straight marriage with kids and might say, "Oh my God, this is me too."
Yes.
So this is the story that is much more inspirational.
Absolutely.
And can give people the opportunity to also discover themselves later in, quote unquote, later in life. So, I have to also keep that in mind, that an earlier story might not have inspired anyone to change their life in any way. It's because I've had to carve a new path. Yeah. That it might allow other people to carve a new path too.
Yes. Absolutely. That it is that you've said in your words, you don't wish, that there is grief, that you feel there was time lost, that you don't wish that path on somebody, and that you wish there was that book, you wish there was that on your shelf, you wish there was that person that would grab you. And these stories have to, that this may be that story. This very well may be that story for somebody. And you get to have that impact because of the life you've lived and the journey you've taken. I almost don't want to go here, but I have to ask, and you do write about this, and we don't have to dwell on it, but anger, what role did anger play? What did you blame? What did you, talk to us a little bit about that?
Okay. I mean, so every people pleaser has a complicated relationship with anger because it's an ugly emotion and it's not one that we ever want to admit to having.
Yeah.
I think over the years I've had to get in touch with anger and being okay with anger. But then also it's something that maybe more recently I've been able to let go of. Because sure, I could be angry at my family or my schooling or my church, but the anger doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
They don't know that I'm angry necessarily. That's not going to change them in any way. I'm not going to be revising the Catholic Church anytime soon, right? Because I'm angry at them. So that anger just is a detriment to me if I hold on to it. I'm the only one who's getting hurt by being angry at anyone else for this. So that's taken me some time to learn, because maybe when I first came out, there's this kind of like, you're kind of mad at, being limited in certain ways. But also when you look to, family or parents or whatever, they were also just going on what they knew. They were also just doing their best. They were raising you like they were raised.
Yes.
And with whatever information they had, or whatever, they thought was best as well.
Yeah.
Because truly, even if things don't look like love, they're often coming from a loving place,
Yeah.
So I think that's been something that I've had to realize and unravel in the process. And I think writing has helped me do that too. Or even like reconnecting with these old letters of mine or old photos and things to like remember that all these things did come from love in some way. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really well put. And I knew asking, I mean, you've put a lot of work, a lot of thinking, a lot of, you sound very balanced, very healed in many ways. So but thank you for sharing that and for going there. So something we haven't talked about yet, when you did come out, you also looked for community, right? So tell us about the community you found, how, what support was there. Talk to us about dating, who you met. Give us a bit of that snapshot of that part of life.
Yeah, so early on when I was questioning, I did find in Toronto, there's the 509 Community Center down in like the gay village. And they had, probably still to this day they do, but they have meetings and things that you can go to for, people who are questioning their sexuality and just want to basically support groups.
Yeah.
And that was really important to me early on. And I did meet at least one good friend through those groups, because again, you're all at the same stage, you're going through the same thing.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out how to fit into this new community. And the queer community is pretty unique too, in the sense that maybe a handful of my good friends now are people that at some point I went on a few dates with. And then we realized we were better off as friends. And so that's kind of a funny thing of the queer community, when like you can meet friends through dating.
Yeah.
And you might even be friends with your exes, which is also something that in the straight world is much more rare. But in terms of finding like friend groups, I'd say it's normal for that to take some time. It can kind of feel a little lonely at times, or you might kind of look at other groups and it can feel quite cliquey, or you feel like, oh wow, there's these groups of friends who are already established and I don't know where mine is. And so it takes time, I'd say, to find like a core of friends that you feel truly close to and supported by. And it might never happen to you. Might just have like, I do feel like a little bit of a lone wolf, in the sense that I have a lot of kind of close friends, but it's like a lot of one-on-one relationships. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily they're a part of the same group.
Yeah.
So I tend to kind of bounce between people and have a lot of like friendships with people, but it's not necessarily like a large core group that all are friends with one another. And I mean, that also has a lot of, I definitely need those friendships in my life, but I don't know what else to say about that. I'm trying to think. I mean, the queer community also is very good at organizing. There's a lot of groups you can join. There's run clubs, there's pickleball clubs, there's basketball drop-in nights. There's, there's all sorts of clubs. There's bike clubs. So I'd say we're very good at making space for community. And so that's also one beautiful thing, is that you can often find friends, or at least a sense of community, by going to these, by participating in these different groups that people have created.
Yeah, that's great. I have a few more questions for you. I want to return to motherhood and this time you in the role of mother, because we haven't talked a lot about that, but what we have talked about is incredibly impactful, right? That act of being pregnant and having your daughter was transformational for your mind and your body. So tell us, what motherhood did to you. And
yeah, I mean, I wonder if I should actually read a small portion of. I can comment on it, and then maybe I'll read you just like a small little tidbit.
Yeah, I would love that.
Okay, I'll read maybe 2 parts, and then you can see if you want to keep them. So again, it's called The Clock on the Wall. So the clock on the wall applies pressure and gives me timelines. I hate it for rushing and directing me like this, for morphing into other faces. The expectant face of my mother, the judgmental face of a priest, any face that told me what I should do and should want to do. I hate how closely I followed those timelines growing up, dating and marriage and motherhood. Even as a child, I was told what a great mother I'd be. And then over time, the pressure came in a series of questions that felt like statements. Are you dating any boys right now? I should be dating boys right now. When are you 2 getting married? I should be getting married soon. Women have a biological clock, inside me like a bomb in the movies with its bright red numbers counting down. The clock on the wall was straight and didn't allow me a queer timeline. It narrowed me onto a path I thought I needed to be on, but one that wasn't meant for me. It was someone else's, from another time, just like the clock. But it felt like an authority, hovering over me every day and watching me move across the room and through life. It was hard to not listen, to not obey the pressure it applied. The clock on the wall tells me that I was silly for listening to it instead of my own internal clock. But back then, it was so loud that I couldn't hear my own. So that was one portion about it. Again, just trying to understand like what has been my relationship to time, and it felt like this concrete narrative that I needed to follow, this path that I needed to follow.
Yeah.
And then later on, so I talk about this kind of negative aspects of time, but then also it's not all bad. So for example, this is when I talk about motherhood. So my daughter, now almost 10, represents a whole decade standing before me, her own arm, the arms of my life clock. Overnight she grows, and it doesn't seem fair because I didn't get a chance to see it happen. The clock on the wall keeps going, and she keeps growing, even as she sleeps, and when I have no choice but to miss it. I don't need a clock on the wall when I have this living, breathing one in front of me. Her life now marks changes within me, with her literal birth linked to my queer one. We were born together. Becoming her mother put me into my body. Even before she was born, she grounded me, as if pulling me into myself from the inside. This is your body, and you should know it, she said as she grew inside me and transformed my body. When you feel me, you also feel you, she told me with every kick. Listen, feel, her presence demanded the bigger she grew. And after she was born, as I sat in her room at night, alone in the dark with my thoughts as she fed, I started to truly see myself. My eyes adjusted to the dark in the room to see both of us more clearly. As she started to stand and toddle around, I too started to stand as myself for the first time. It's okay to wobble, her staccato steps reassured me. Everything can be new again, her wide eyes reminded me in amazement. Who am I? We both wondered. She's the greatest gift the clock on the wall has given me.
Yeah.
I'm surprised I didn't cry for that. I really had to act. Do not cry. You can do this. Do not cry. Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I was getting a little bit watery. I didn't know if you could tell. And I was like, take a breath. That was a beautiful answer. There's no better answer you could have given to the question than sharing that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
So would that be available? You do have a collected works in the works. Tell us about that. Will this be part of it?
So I think this will not be part of the first one, the one that I'm working on right now.
Okay.
This feels like part of one that's more about kind of late in life things, coming at late in life, grief, potentially an autism diagnosis, and those kind of the idea of lateness and the collection around that. But the one I'm working on right now is more centered on love and relationships. I tend to write a lot of love stories, or like whether it's romantic or about family or about my relationship to church or God or whatever growing up, or in the complicated, familial relationships. But yeah, they're a series of essays about love from a queer and feminist lens. And I'm aiming to have a first sort of full draft finished in the spring. And so I don't know how long of a process it'll be after that, but it is nice to at least have the majority of it done now, and to feel like I'm starting to just try and order it in a way that makes sense. And to see it from more of a perspective, kind of a broader perspective, to be like, okay, what is this story I'm telling? What is the arc of this character who is me but also isn't me? And yeah, so it feels like a nice place to be nearing the end of putting it together into something that feels cohesive.
Beautiful. I'm excited to have the chance to read when it comes out. I have more questions. I have a couple we'll talk about. I have questions that you've written about that I'm curious about your relationship with religion today. I'm curious about significant relationships in your life now. But maybe that's something we hold for maybe once your collective works come out, we can do a follow-up session, something like that.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so much more I want to ask you, but a couple of really important questions as we wrap up. What are you most proud of in your life?
Oh, wow. I think I'm proudest of, I guess, the undoing.
Yeah.
And I mean the undoing in multiple ways. So the undoing in terms of, or redoing, I don't know what you want to call it, but like finding this new path in a way that's kind of undoing this previous, less authentic version of myself, to explore these things that are exciting to me and that feel meaningful. And the undoing, even when I think of like in motherhood, the way I like my relationship to my daughter, I guess I'm trying to give her things that I felt like would have been really valuable to me earlier on. I think growing up, there was more of a sense of like parenting and the church and everything. It was kind of more telling a kid who they should be in a way.
Yeah.
Rather than helping them figure out who they are,
Yeah.
And so I feel proud in moments when I feel like I understand my daughter's heart, and like when I'm like, I get you, and this confirmed that I get you.
Yeah.
And that feels good, because I mean, and not to say I'm not a perfect mom, and there's times when I don't, but I feel like I'm like, repair is important to me, and improving, my relationship. So yeah, undoing, kind of broadly speaking, but with those specific examples.
Yeah. Beautiful. You've given, both probably unintentionally and through your podcast and your writing and some of your conversations intentionally, you've given advice throughout our conversation, throughout a lot of what you've put out. But I still want to ask for some advice on this podcast. What advice would you give to younger generations? And I don't know if that's your daughter or the younger you, your students, wherever you want that to sit.
Question things as early as you can. Like, I think part of religion for me was, it certainly didn't foster any critical thinking.
Yeah.
It didn't foster any questioning. It was much more dogmatic, to be like, this is what you should think.
Yeah.
And so I think, just questioning things earlier and really trying to understand who you are, and not just you in relationship to all those forces that socialized you early on.
Yeah.
So like questioning, exploring, experimenting, kind of being brave,
Yeah.
And really just questioning. And I mean, if you can do that undoing sooner, the sooner you can get on that project. I think the sooner you'll feel like you are yourself.
Yeah, that's great. So, as I've said, there are more things I want to talk about, but for today we're going to come to a close. Is there anything that you wanted to share that we haven't touched on that we should really include in this episode?
No, I think that's great. I mean, thanks so much for touching on so much. I feel like we really went to a lot of different places, and I love those kinds of conversations. So great. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for making the time. It was my absolute pleasure. I look forward to reading more and having a follow-up conversation at some point. So thanks for joining us today and sharing your true, vulnerable, and authentic story and self with us.
Thanks, Carrie.
You've been listening to AudioLife, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. I've been your host today, Carrie Purcell, speaking with our guest, Alena Papayanis. You can find Alena on social media. You can hear her on her podcast, Dear Queer, and you can read many of her essays, including her collected works, which we'll look forward to. Today's November 8th, 2025. She's planning to publish spring of 2026. You can also check out our conversation on YouTube at AudioLife Memoirs if you're listening to the audio podcast version. I hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next time.
If you like what you heard today, consider recording your own AudioLife private podcast or giving one to a loved one for a unique and memorable gift. Today, AudioLife listeners will receive 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. Also, remember to rate our show and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode.